Hello, and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. My name is Matt Quinn, and this is In the Roud, a folk song podcast. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene to talk about their own version of the song. We're now in the middle of Season 3, and this is Episode 7. This week we're looking at the song labelled Roud 27, which is Child Ballad number 14, that's The Bonnie Banks of Fordie. Later on we'll hear from our singer guest Katie Macfarlane, but for now let's take a look at the history of this song with In the Roud regular contributor Brian Peters. Well, hello, Brian Peters. How lovely to have you back.
Hello, Matt. Always a pleasure to be back in these sessions.
Great. Well, how are you? How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I've been wearing my researcher hat quite a bit lately, and not quite so much of my singer's hat. But I just, to a great sigh of relief on my part, managed to submit a very long and complicated article about Cecil Sharp, which attempts to push back against some of the what I regard as increasingly unhinged political attacks against him, which we might talk about when we do a session about Cecil Sharp in the Collector series later in the year. So I don't need to talk about that now. But the other thing I've been doing, which is kind of possibly timely to mention, is I was down in London for the Broadside Day conference a couple of weeks ago, which was an excellent conference. I really enjoyed that, and it's the first Broadside Day I've been to. I always tend to go to the traditional song conferences, but there was some fascinating stuff there, and it also fell upon me to present to David Atkinson, who is a historical guest who's going to be with you very, very shortly, I believe. I presented him with his English Folk Dance and Song Society Gold Badge for extraordinary service to the Society specifically and the cause of folk song in general. I'd actually nominated him for it and gave the citation, so I got to pin the badge on his lapel, and very well deserved it was too. Those of your listeners who don't know who David Atkinson is, because he does keep a fairly low profile, he's been the editor of the Folk Music Journal for some years now, but before he got into that, into studies of cheap print and broadsides and chapbooks and so on, he was also really quite a prominent expert on the ballads, and he was a regular presenter at the international ballad conferences all over the world, and he's contributed some quite important books about ballads and how they work, and he's an intellectual. A lot of his stuff is quite high flown, but he does know a lot.
Excellent. Yeah, David will be on. I mean, in terms of the podcast, he'll be on next week on the history side of the next song. In terms of when I record him, I'll be on a Zoom chat with him in about an hour and a quarter. So it's a packed day today. You and then David straight away afterwards. It's yeah, can't wait. I've not actually met him yet. I'll meet him in an hour and a quarter on a Zoom chat. So
well, quite coincidentally, he's an old friend of mine from a university degree in zoology about 50 years ago.
wow. Okay, there we go. Excellent. Yes, I that Broadside Day in London was in my diary for a while, but I think I had a gig that night in the end, and I couldn't make it. It was something on my mind. But there's a traditional song forum conference coming up in Sheffield in the end of April.
Yeah, and, I will see you there.
I'll see you there. I'm not presenting anything. I've booked my ticket, and I'm going to sit there and soak it all in. Basically, I'm a spectator. Let's get on with this song. This is your first appearance in this season. Normally, we've managed to get you on earlier in the season than this, but this time we're already at episode 7, Roud 27, Child Ballad number 14, The Bonnie Banks of Fordie. So, as always, give us a sort of, what's the song about, and the plot of the song. What are we dealing with when it comes to this one?
Okay, what's it all about? Well, it's really quite the dark ballad. It's basically about serial killing. What is common to pretty much all of the versions is it involves three sisters who go out for a walk into the forest. Um, Often they're going to pick flowers, although that's not always specified. Sometimes they're walking together, or sometimes they go out in sequence. But somehow or other, they meet a stranger. And in the versions that are in Child, he's often described as a banished man, sometimes as an outlier, and in one version as a Loudon Lord, which, according to my reading of the Scottish National Dictionary, Loudon in this context means Lothian. Um, so basically, he's a bit like the outlandish knight. He's an outlier. He's been banished from where he started off from. So he's now, hiding out in the woods, I guess. But it soon becomes clear that he's not just a mysterious foreigner, but he's a robber, and he challenges the sisters one by one. If they're all together, the three of them are all walking in the woods together. He just takes the eldest by the hand, and he demands marriage. And at this point, it's perfectly clear what he's up to, because he declares to her, "Will you be a rank robber's wife?" So at this point, we know that he's a villain. He's a robber, and if you don't want to be a rank robber's wife, well, you're going to die by my penknife. The first thing that kind of struck me is when is this really a marriage proposal, or is he basically saying, are you going to have sex with me? Because if not, I'm going to kill you. Is this just a euphemism? And there's one version in Child which does state that quite explicitly. It's a version from Paisley that ended up in William Motherwell's collection, and in that one, he asks her. Is Tau, I presume that's a sort of dialect pronunciation of ist thou. Is Tau a maid or is Tau a wife? Wilt thou twin with thy maidenhead or else thy sweet life? So he's saying very explicitly there, I want your maidenhead or you're going to die. So maybe that's what these so-called marriage proposals are about all along. But whether you believe that or not, the first and the second of the two sisters refuse marriage and say, no, I'd rather die, and are stabbed. Or in one of them, he, in a rather odd sequence, he says, will you rest your head on my staff? And then he cuts it off with the penknife. Penknives were the things that people used for sharpening quill pens. And as you will well know, penknives are used as murder weapons in all kinds of different songs and ballads. Generally, you imagine it as being a short, sharp blade, which might or might not fold into its handle in the way that modern pocket knives do. But it's probably an implement for stabbing rather than beheading. So that is a little bit odd. At any rate, the first two sisters are murdered. Sometimes, if the daughters are walking into the woods in sequence, the first daughter has gone on her own, been murdered. The second sister goes to look for her, and then she meets the same fate. But things tend to turn around when the third sister turns up, and she's the youngest sister. And there is a bit of a thing in some of these old ballads about younger sisters. If you remember some versions of Riddles Wisely Expounded, the first sister does something fairly bland and anodyne, and the second sister makes a bed for the guy, but it's the third, the youngest sister, who goes to bed with him and gets to answer all the riddles and so on. So the youngest sister is the most resourceful here, and she usually, not invariably, but she usually tells the villain that she has a brother, or sometimes two, or sometimes three brothers who are going to kill him if he harms her. So the robber asks some questions about who the brother or brothers might be, and she gives him information that makes him realize immediately that he is actually her brother. It's one of these songs like the Claudie Banks, these Broken Token things, where somehow he's managed not to recognize her, but maybe he's been long banished or he's illegitimate or whatever. So she does not recognize him, but he recognizes the description of her brother and says, oh my God, it was me and I've killed my sisters. And then usually he kills himself with his own knife. In one of the versions, he actually takes a run at it and impales himself on it, like the Romans used to fall on their sword. So there's a bit of a suspension of disbelief involved about her not recognizing him. So that is the basic story of the ballad. For those of us who are into incremental repetition, which I've certainly talked at in these sessions before, and I'm sure some of your other contributors have too, there's a lot of it goes on in this ballad. It's quite repetitive. So with the first, when each sister turns up, he takes the sister by the hand and he turns around and bids her stand. Something like that keeps coming up with each sister. And then with each sister, he asks the same stanza: will you be a rank robber's wife, or will you die by my penknife? And then in the first two cases, they say, I'll not be a rank robber's wife, and I will die by your penknife. And then the younger sister, who's the resourceful one, says, I'll not be a rank robber's wife, but I will die. Sorry, but I won't die by your penknife. Yeah, that was a fairly important slip up to correct there. I will not die by your penknife. But the point is that these verses keep repeating over and over again. It's a very formulaic ballad. So that I think is enough about the basic plot, because there are some variations on it.
Sure, yeah. Yes, I've come to appreciate incremental repetition over the course. So sometimes I always found it a bit, sort of tedious, but then occasionally I'm now starting to appreciate it a bit more.
Well, I'm
It's
going to say something about that. It's one of my, as somebody who's sung a lot of these ballads myself, you're always aware that you don't want to go on too long. But maybe when I was kind of young and naive, I thought, yeah, we can just get rid of some of this repetitive stuff and it'll all be a lot shorter and more interesting. But of course, as I might have said to you before, every good storyteller has formula that they repeat. That's how they draw you in. And that's exactly what I think this incremental repetition does. So, although sometimes it just seems like it's a bit too much, on the whole, I think it adds greatly to the power of the narrative.
Absolutely. So then, is this a song that has travelled far and wide, or has it stayed in one place? What's the popularity and widespreadness of this song?
It's travelled. I don't think it was a particularly popular one. The concentration of versions is definitely in Scotland, and there are some that were collected elsewhere, but still clearly originate from Scotland. For instance, there's one from an English gypsy community, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, but that was said to have been learnt from somebody in Scotland. Um, the only one I managed to find in Ireland, and I haven't been able to track it down because I only found it this morning. There's a reference in the Vaughan Williams Archive Index to something by Joe Heaney, but I haven't been able to track that one down, so I can't tell anything more about that. Otherwise, we're looking at New England and the Canadian Maritimes, and we're not looking at very many of those. Bertrand Bronson, Traditional Tunes of the Child Ballads, which we always use as a kind of rough guide to both the popularity and to the spread of these ballads. He's just got 8 versions there. Two of those are old Scots versions, which correspond to two of the versions that are in Child. And he has some, let's say, a couple of texts from Newfoundland, and I think something from upstate New York, and maybe a couple from Vermont. So he doesn't have a lot, but it did travel across the Atlantic. And also, we have to be aware with Bronson that because of when he did his work, he put his collection together in the 1960s. He didn't include everything. And one significant collection that he didn't have available to him was that of James Madison Carpenter, who did in fact collect several versions of this ballad. So there's more of it than just the did I say there were 5 texts in Child and 8 versions in Bronson? There's a bit more than that there, but that gives you the idea that it's nowhere near the Barbara Ellen, Lord Thomas, and Fair Ellender, these ones where there are hundreds and hundreds of variants.
Yeah, that's right. And I just did a quick check on the Roud Index as well, as I always do. 88 entries in the Roud Index. But then, as we know, some of those will be duplicates because
Oh, and
that's
there's
the
an
way.
awful lot of repetition in the Roud Index. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
if I have time with these things, and I haven't had time in the case of this one, so I will go through all of those 88 entries and boil them down till we know how many of them are unique. And I suspect we'll find that there are not many of them that are unique. I know for a fact that a number of the James Madsen Carpenter versions are duplicated over and over again because the way that collection is organized.
Absolutely. But it gives you a starting point anyway, an indication of sometimes if it's of
Yeah,
a song's kind of spread.
yeah,
So, uh, so yeah, we're talking about basically Scotland and then USA and Canada, aren't we? Really, and
pretty much.
there's five entries in the Rad Index for England, but two of them are the same. There's three that are the same singer, probably the same version, and then there's two others. So I think there's three from England rather than five because I think
Yeah, well,
three of
and
three
one
of
of
those
those.
entries are the same person.
Yeah, one of the English ones is the Gypsy version I mentioned before. Another is a woman who I'll also talk about again, who was living in Huddersfield but came from Scotland. So I kind of count that as a Scottish version.
Well, that's very true, and that's the one where there's three entries for the same,
Yeah.
probably the same performance. Uh, it's yeah. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. Yeah, how far back can we go with this song? What's the earliest we can you can take us back to?
Well, we can't take it back all that far. What we don't have here is any kind of broadside version from, the late 17th century, as we do with a number of the Barbara Allen, Lord Thomas, House Carpenter type ballads. That many of them were printed around then, but we have nothing here at all. And this is also probably one of the reasons why it never took hold in England, because when we look at the ballads like Barbara Allen that were particularly common in England, it's because of subsequent broadside printings right through the 19th century, which is what really made them popular with singers. So we've no broadside to tell us, to give us any indication of where the sort of endpoint is working backwards. The oldest text in Child would be his 14b, I would imagine, which is from David Hurd, who turns up a lot in many of these Scots child ballads. You'll see David Hurd's name there, along with Sir Walter Scott and Kinloch and Motherwell and so on. So his ancient Scottish songs and heroic ballads was published in 1769, I believe. The text in Child is actually from, I think, from his manuscript rather than the book. But you're looking at second half of the 18th century for that one, and we don't have anything older than that from these islands, but we do have multiple versions from Scandinavia, which, of course, Child, as usual, lists in his head notes, which are not as long as the head notes he has for many ballads, but he does talk about versions of this from Denmark, from Sweden, from the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Norway. And again, he's quite vague about some of those, but it's not unlikely that the ballad may have originally came from there. There's quite a lot in common. I'll talk a little bit about the Scandinavian ones now, if you don't mind.
Yep, sure.
The formula is often based on three sisters who are going out into the woods, and there they meet. Sometimes it's actually three robbers rather than one, but then it kind of goes off at a bit of a tangent. Often the robbers kill all of the sisters, and then they go back to their house seeking lodging. And there are certain variations depending on which of these Scandinavian countries you're looking at. Sometimes they even request that they're allowed to sleep with the sister's mother, which is really quite an odd development. And at some point, they're asked to disclose the contents of their bags, like the bag check when you go into a museum, and some belongings of the sisters, like some trinkets or a sark, are found in the bag, and usually then they end up being executed. There's an odd text from Denmark, which is called Herr Truel's Three Daughters, in which they go back to the family home, admit that they've killed the sisters, and then say, yeah, but in mitigation, we've had very hard lives, and we never actually committed any crimes at all until the triple murder yesterday. And Herr Truel actually offers them some new clothes and said, well, okay, then off you go. But they say, oh no, I think we'd better be executed after all. So it's a crazy version of the story. Also, interesting to note that some of the Scandinavian texts have supernatural elements that water might spring from the graves of the women, or a miraculous light might appear overhead, or the church bells might start to ring by themselves. So it's quite possible, I think, that these Scandinavian analogues predate the Scottish ones, and maybe Steve Garden would be the one who'd probably have more to offer on this one. But some of them may be translations or based on these old Scandinavian ballads. They're clearly not word for word translations because the stories sometimes go off at a different angle, but they may well be based on them. And before we leave the Scandinavian variants. I don't know if you know this, but you are a film buff. Ingmar Bergman made a film in 1960 called The Virgin Spring, which was
Yep, I've
based.
seen it. I have
Oh,
seen it.
you have,
I
and
have seen it.
did you immediately think, "Oh gosh, yes, that's Child Ballad 14. I know that story."
Actually, I did not, but then I haven't. I saw it. Where are we now? 2025. So I think I saw it in about 2021,
Yeah,
and so it's been a while. And I no, I never put the two together. Sometimes I'm quite good at that, and sometimes I'm not.
no, that it doesn't reflect back on you. I probably would have missed it as well, but now that you know that, I think you need to go and watch it again.
I think I do. Yes, absolutely. It's a really, really good film as well. It's very,
Mm.
very powerful stuff.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let's start off with the name of the song because if we look under Child 14, we will see these two alternative titles, and one is Babylon, and the other is The Bonny Banks of Fordie, which is what we've chosen to call it for the sake of this podcast. But when I first came across this, I can't remember exactly how it happened, but you think Babylon, what the hell's that about? Is it a murder ballad set in the Hanging Gardens or something? And then you find out that no, it's nothing to do with the ancient city with one of the great wonders of the world and built there. It's actually two words, and Child's generic title is actually taken from what Motherwell had called this ballad in his minstrelsy, Ancient and Modern. And where we get to the point where the youngest sister tells the robber, "Well, if you kill me, then my big brother's going to come and get you, mate." She says her brother is called Baby Lon, which is still rather bizarre. I'm sure, again, going back to your career as a film aficionado, you'll have come across Lon Chaney. So whether Baby Lon is just a very young person. You wouldn't think he was very intimidating as a vengeful brother in that case. But anyway,
No, maybe not. No.
the brother is called Baby Lon, and at this point, the robber says, "Oh my God, that's my name," and then kills himself. So
Right.
that is where the whole Babylon things comes from, but none of the other versions, in Child at least, have got anything about Babylon mentioned by name at all. So what generally happens, in certainly in most of the other versions in Child, the robber asks who the brothers are, and the younger sister maybe tells him something about them. The most complete text is the one where she says, "Well, my first brother is a minister, the second is a ploughman, and the third is an outlier bold, i.e., an outlaw." And that is exactly the same description as the robber had been given in the third verse of that ballad. So when he hears that the brother is an outlier bold, then again he realizes, "Oh my God, it's me," and then he falls on his sword. So if we go to the American versions, or the I should say North American versions, because we're including Canada here. If we go to Bronson and look at some of those, we can see some fairly close links to this kind of theme about the identity of the brothers and how the robber guesses his own identity. So we've got a couple of versions in Bronson from Newfoundland, which were one of which was collected by our own Maud Carpellies, the famous Maud, in 1934, who mounted a collecting expedition over to Newfoundland, which was something that she'd planned to do with Cecil Sharp while they were in the Appalachian Mountains, but his health was never going to permit it, and he'd already been dead 10 years by the time she finally got there. I think there's some really interesting new research about to be published or already published about Maud Carpellies in Newfoundland. And the other people who found this ballad there were collectors called Greenleaf and Mansfield, who were working about the same time as Maud in the 1930s. There's another similar one that was collected by Helen Harkness Flanders, who we've also talked about on these programs before. She collected it in Vermont. So it's quite interesting because these three different versions have all got a fair bit in common. The two locations in Newfoundland where they were collected were 120 miles apart, but only just across the bay from each other. So you can see how the song might have travelled and retained a lot of its features, but the Quetchi in Vermont, where Helen Harkness Flanders found it, is actually 1,400 miles away. Nonetheless, there are a number of similar elements. The tunes are different, but you can sense them, that kind of minor key with a minor third in. And although the shape isn't entirely the same, you can sense if you sing them all through, there's a bit of commonality between the tunes. And the next thing you find out is that in all of these versions, she names the first brother as a minister, just like that Scots version. The second brother is not specified, and it might even be that she's only got two brothers, though she doesn't name them as being two brothers. And then the third brother she describes as, in these three versions from North America, as a robber like yourself. So that is the point at which the penny drops, and he thinks, I've murdered my sisters. Also, interestingly, the Vermont version, I think I told you earlier on that in the Scots ballads, he says, will you be a rank robber's wife? Well, you can imagine exactly how this has gone as the ballad has been rationalized, and through the process of transmission, he's now become a bank robber. That was a very easy rationalization to make. There was one other version that Helen Harkness Flanders found, and I guess that's Vermont as well. I haven't made a note of it. That has a nonsense chorus. It goes "Heki Hai Si Bernio" is the second line, and the last line, which repeats, is "on the bonny banks of Bernio." So we've got the bonny banks of Fordie. In many of the later Scots versions, which I'll talk about, we have the bonny banks of Airdrio. We have American versions where it's the bonny banks of Vergio. In this one, it's Bernio, and the tune is kind of this very simple sing-song sort of a tune, which I won't attempt to reproduce now. But it looks almost as if it's a version that children had sung, as we find out with quite a lot of these old ballads, like The Old Woman Who Lived in the Wood, which is basically the cruel mother. There are children's versions which are still fairly dark but approached in a light-hearted way. So I wondered about that, even though it wasn't collected from children. And oh, here's another location for you. Here's a version from the USA. Can't remember. Oh, New Hampshire. That's where it was from. Found this in the Roud Index. Haven't looked at the text, but it was called "On the Burly Burly Banks of Barbary." Oh, so none of these locations are particularly significant. It won't have got anything to do with the Barbary Coast in North Africa. These are just made up place names, really.
Well, I was about to say, Barbary does turn up in other songs, Hi Barbary and that sort of thing, but there's, as you said, probably no real connection.
No, I mean, yeah, maybe at some point the High Barbary song crossed over and somebody had heard the word Barbary before and thought, yeah, that'll do as a location for this one, even though we're not at sea. I don't know, the bonny banks of Barbary. Oh, I suppose we could be at the seaside. I always assumed we were by the side of a river when we're by the banks of somewhere, but who knows?
Yeah, maybe it's just a nice bit of alliteration. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Sometimes these things just have a ring to them. So there's one other, what I've written in my notes as interesting plot variation. Child's Eversion. This is from Kinloch's Ancient Scottish Ballads, again, one of Child's regular sources. And in this case, rather than the sister telling the murderer that she's going to whistle and her brother's going to come running, the brother actually turns up just as she is about to be murdered, and he recognizes her by her yellow hair. And fortunately, he's got a bit of a band of men with him, so they apprehend the robber. And the robber having been captured, the brother promises that he is going to be punished either by being hanged from a tree or, wait for it, thrown into the poisoned lake to feed the toads and the rattlesnake. So that's if I have actually recorded this ballad in the past, but I don't think I'd come across that one. It's the kind of line you really want to sing. Although I do wonder whether rattlesnakes are native to Scotland. I wasn't kind of aware of that, but it's a good little verse that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Although sometimes, as again, we come across sometimes with these songs, with these variations or littles or differences, sometimes it's a case of misremembering and all sorts. But sometimes you can't discount the possibility that it might just be a bit of creative license on the part of whoever's singing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in the case of particularly these Scottish ballads, there's a lot of creative license, but sometimes it's on the part of people who are literate and possibly not unfamiliar with poetry as well. But that's a whole other chat. I don't think these ballads were all recreated by, farm labourers living in bothies. I think there was a strong literary element to them as well. But
Right, sure.
moving on from that, because that's a discussion I don't want to get involved with now. I wanted to
Yeah.
tell you because one of the best things about doing this kind of research, why I enjoy doing it, is the rabbit holes. I mean, we all love a good rabbit hole. So I found that there was this version. I found it in the index that there was this English version. As you were saying, there is this handful of versions from England, and it was from a book called In Gypsy Tents. And what I always do when I see an old book, this is I think from around about the turn of the century, is I go to that wonderful resource which is the Internet Archive. And this is a handy hint for your listeners if you're ever looking for a book, particularly antiquarian books, but you can find much more up-to-date things there as well. If you put in the name of the book and maybe the author and add the word archive, an awful lot of the time these days you will pop up this resource called the Intimate, I nearly said there. No, not that kind of archive. Internet Archive, and it will have the entire book there as images, and you can turn the pages and you can magnify it.
And there's usually a download button as well, which is very very handy. That's how I have a copy of Child. I downloaded the PDF scan of it from the Internet Archive. And Bronson, oh no, I already had a copy of Bronson from somewhere else, but I've got a PDF of Child, of the complete Child that I got from the Internet Archive, which is, and the key thing with that is I don't know if you're about to say this or not, but you can search through it. You can search just as you would on a Word document. You can search for Control F or Command F, search for a word or phrase, and it'll bring you. You don't have to scroll through 300 pages. It just takes you to the exact thing you're looking for.
Yeah, well, that absolutely you hit the nail on the head there, Matt, because that's the other real godsend of that resource. I was doing some research recently on Lancashire songs, industrial songs of the early 19th century, and not only were a lot of these antiquarian collections of Lancashire dialect material on there, often put up there by universities in the USA. There seems to be quite a lot of people interested in this antiquarian stuff. But I was referring to a copy of The Making of the English Working Class by E.P. Thompson, which was this gigantic book of 600 odd pages, and looking for something in there. And I thought, God, this is just a nightmare leafing through the pages to try and remember where I'd seen something. And I thought, oh, yeah, duh, Control F on the copy of the Making the English Working Class that's on the Internet Archive and instantly found what I was looking for. So, yes, absolutely right there. So, In Gypsy Tents, written by Francis Hines Groom, was on the Internet Archive. So I had a look at it. This is actually research done this very morning. So the author was the son of the Archdeacon of Suffolk. He was born in 1851 and he made himself an expert on gypsy life and language and folklore. He actually, I'm not quite clear how he managed to do this, but he learned the Romany language as a child, whether they were gypsy communities locally that he used to mix with. But he really got seriously into that lifestyle, married a woman from the gypsy community called Esmeralda Locke. The Locks were a great gypsy family, as you might know. Cecil Sharp collected fiddle tunes from the Locks. Fred Jordan learnt the outlandish night from the Locks, who were gypsies who were working in his area of the Welsh borders at the time. So Francis Hine Groom, I should say. I I don't know what the kind of current view of Francis Hines Groom is because I would be interested to talk to somebody from the community nowadays to see what they think of his work. But somebody was writing about him in 1967 in an academic article, said he befriended these pariahs, he loaned them money, he treated them at the local tavern, gladly stopped along the street to chat with them, was often mistaken for gypsies by one of their own kind, and actually longed to be one of them. So whether you find his account convincing or whether possibly you might find it patronizing or inaccurate, I don't know, but he was certainly well into these communities. So this book in gypsy tents is an account of life amongst the people of the travellers in the Welsh border area. And he gives in this book an account of a singing session, which is wonderfully written in very colourful prose. So they begin with a song in Welsh, and then the community basically decides, okay, we're going to have a singing session now. The grandmother figure sings Cold Blows the Wind to the kind of text that we in the folk world are quite familiar with. And the author, Groom, at this point remarks that maybe collectors might have got a richer haul of songs amongst tents like these people were living in than by travelling much further afield. So he then gives an account that a young woman of the community sings I Wish to what he calls a buzzing, quavering tune. And then the song The Leather Bottle is roared out, he writes, by a man called Pyramus. I mean, what a fantastic name, Pyramus and Tisbe. Pyramus roars it out with a voice that almost shook the chair of Idris, which of course is Cadair Idris, the mountain. And then a woman called Sinfi sings what he calls this Scottish ballad, which he had learnt from Jockey Nielsen's wife, and it starts, there were three sisters going from home, all in a lee and a lonio. He met a man, he made them stand down by the bonny banks of Airdrio. And Groom writes that he immediately realised that this was a song he'd been told about before, which had been described to him as a very lonesome death song about a yard and a half long, which is a great way to describe a lengthy ballad. And
That's very good.
Croom writes that it was sung to a kind of monotonous chant, sad and suggestive as a river's flow, and it was accompanied by a young man called Lancelot, a 20-year-old man on the fiddle. It was described as a masterly accompaniment that pleaded for the murdered, raved at the murderer, and moaned for his remorseful suicide. Wouldn't we all like to be able to create an accompaniment like that on our guitar or our concertina?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the community, somebody then sings the ballad of Sir Hugh, and that's pretty much the end of his account of the singing. But it's a really fascinating account which I'd never come across before I started to research this ballad, and the book in Gypsy Tents suddenly popped up on the search. You might have noticed, in fact, you might have been um, itching to stop me, but I sort of carried on talking like politicians who are being interviewed on the Today program. The refrain, um, all in a lee and a lonio. What does that remind us of?
All alone and aloney. All
Yeah.
alone and aloney. It's something that's already happened on this podcast, isn't it? And
Yes.
that's proving my lack of memory of what I've just done.
Oh well,
It's
sorry.
something within the first 25 round numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. Sorry. You've
No, it's
spotted the chorus correctly. It's the cruel mother.
it's the
Um,
cruel mother, of course it is. Yes, that's right.
And I was also struck by one of the versions in Child had a couplet that I know from some versions of The Cruel Mother. He wiped his knife along the dew, the more he wiped, the redder it grew. There are stanzas like that in some version of The Cruel Mother, which is kind of a metaphor for the guilt of the mother, I think, that she can't wipe the blood off, like Lady Macbeth can't get the blood off her hands. So that was quite an interesting parallel again with the cruel mother. But again, I'm sure most people would just regard that as some kind of a ballad commonplace rather than the fact that there's a direct relationship between the ballads. The Gypsy version also, the two brothers were called John and James. She names them, the younger sister, and one is a minister, the other is such as you. So we're seeing parallels now between the Scottish ballad that had percolated into this gypsy community in the Welsh borders, something very similar to what they're singing in Vermont, and probably both of them derived originally from Scotland.
And I was just looking at that entry in the Roud Index for the In Gypsy Tents one, and yeah, it's been labelled as the Three Sisters, which is why the Roud Index is helpful. Is because if you're looking for the two sisters or something, you might accidentally come across the Three Sisters, which is this. But if you know that it's actually part of Route 27, then you know it's not actually part of Route 8, the Two Sisters. But also, yeah, it's noted it's, date collected was the 1870s. And named performer, we've got for that one, Sinfi Lovell. And I
Yeah.
did click on the name, and that is the only mention of that singer in the entire of the Roud Index.
Hmm.
So I wonder if you hadn't heard of this book before. Neither had I. I wonder if almost anyone apart from Steve Roud has heard of this book.
Yeah,
you know.
well, I'm really glad I did, though.
Well, yes, absolutely. It's just, and so yeah, it's interesting that that's the only time that name turns up in the entire Roud Index is
Yeah.
that particular song in that particular book.
Yeah, well, there are, as I say, that I think there were four or five songs in that chapter, but they were all sung by different people, and it was like a sing-around. Clearly, the grandmother kicks it off, and then everybody who's got a song will contribute it.
Yeah.
So
And so
if we're
that singer,
interested,
or maybe that group of people, were never ever again encountered any more folk song collectors or anyone documenting anything. It's
no, that's
where
right. I think
it's
Groom was I'm not saying unique, but I think Groom was a real specialist, and he was interested in folklore more generally anyway. So of course, if he heard some singing, he would make a note of it, and he took the trouble to note all the verses down.
yeah. So properly, yeah, a real one-off in the Roud Index there, just a
Hmm.
single version of a single singer, a a single entry for a single singer singing that one. But yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
So
Anyway, yeah, refrains then.
okay, refrains. So we've got a variety of them really. The Child's A version, which I think was one from Motherwell, has interspersed refrain lines. So the second line is A thou bonny, and the fourth line is on the bonny banks of Fordie, which is where Child gets his other title from. But Child B, the B version, has a rather different refrain. We've got Annette and Margaret and Marjorie is the second line. Excuse me, and the fourth line is and the dew it lies on the wood, gay lady. Now, I'm thinking when I read that line, that sounds familiar, but I'm not quite
Yeah,
sure why. But then you get to the next version in Child, his C version, and we have something that's definitely familiar. Gillyflower gentle rosemary, and the dew, it hangs over the mulberry tree. And I've definitely heard that one before.
and
But you
that
can
is a version of the Cruel Mother.
yeah, and but you'll also find that with the version of Child One, Riddles Wisely Expounded, the one from Cornwall. They've got Jennifer, Gentle, and Rosemary, but they're all about magical herbs, the gillyflower, the gentle, and the rosemary. And so I think this Annette and Margaret and Marjorie and the dew it lies on the wood, gay lady, is related to that somehow. It looks like a kind of slightly not, I don't know if garbled is the word, but they've replaced the herbs with the names of the three sisters. So
Right,
anyway,
yeah,
we
sure.
have this again. It's a slightly generic chorus. If I'd got my wits about me, I'd be able to probably name one or two other ballads that you find it with, but I haven't worked that one out yet. Then Child E, we have the three sisters are named again in the refrain: Elizabeth, Margaret, and Fair Mary, and the fourth line to pull the rose and the fair lily. Again, that's all about the three sisters are named, and they've managed to include the fact that they've gone to pick flowers, so that makes some sense. The northeastern American continent, the versions there, quite a couple of them have got all in a Lee and a Lonio, so we're back with that kind of cruel motherish refrain. And then the fourth line is on the bonny bonny banks of Vergio, or the one that I think we mentioned, the bonny bonny banks of Barbary O. Then many of the Scots versions, which would turn up in the Carpenter collection and in some of the other ones that are in the School of Scottish Studies, the banks are the banks of Airdrie or Airdrie O, or sometimes Eldrie, which I'm sure is a corruption of Airdrie. But as we'll find, some of those Scots versions don't work in that alternating refrain sequence, which I think we'll come to when we get there. But nearly all of them have the Bonnie Bonnie Banks of somewhere, but they don't necessarily have a line that corresponds to All of Lee and Elonio or whatever as the second line. So, Carpenter, James Madison Carpenter, I'm pretty sure I've talked about him before. He was the collector who came over from America. He studied with Kittredge, who was in turn had studied with Child. So there's a direct link from Francis James Child through to James Madison Carpenter. He came over here in the late 1920s, travelled all over these islands to he went to Ireland itself at one point. He got shanties in South Wales. He got mummers' plays and dances and songs in the English Midlands. And he got this amazing store of ballads from Northeast Scotland. And I know we've talked about that. So I went to the Vaughan Williams archive. They've got all of James Madison Carpenter's collection there, both as text and tunes, and sometimes with sound recordings as well, which were made on a dictation machine, which, what would have been men in those days in high positions used to dictate letters for their secretaries to type up. And the sound of a dictaphone was not high fidelity. They weren't made for recording music. They were just made to be able to decipher speech from. So the recordings of Carpenter are pretty ropey, and a lot of them have deteriorated anyway. So they're a bit rough, but you can often get the idea. So what have we got from Carpenter? Well, he did get some material from America as well, although his most notable stuff was from these islands. And he's got a version from Viola Cook in Kentucky, and he titles that Babylon, which immediately made me suspicious. So were they really singing about Babylon in Kentucky? And when I looked at the text, it looks to me like the version that Child has and came from William Motherwell. And I think this is sometimes something you have to bear in mind with a small number of these American versions. You get terribly excited about, wow, this is a text that looks just like the one from Scotland. And then you think it's so identical to the one from Scotland that clearly they'd learnt it from the book. And some of these, it's not always specified who the songs were collected from, but some of them were possibly collected from educated people who had ballad collections. So I think Viola Cook is one of those kind of people. Next one is Mrs. Alexander McEwen. Now this is my favourite. Okay, she called it the Banks of Eldrie, which is obviously similar or a corruption of Airdrie, and that was quite interesting because I think there was a subtitle, and that the subtitle was Bubblin' Johnny. Now, who is Bubblin' Johnny? Well, the robber has killed the first two sisters. The third sister says, "You're not going to kill me because I've got a brother who will kill you." Oh, really? What's his name? His name is Bubblin' Johnny. Now, thinking back, we're thinking baby long, bubbling. So maybe there's a relationship there. In fact, almost certainly I would say there is. Bubbling Johnny is the brother, and Mrs. Alexandra McEwen, there is a dictaphone recording of her, but it's really, really poor. It sounds as if it's quite a garbled version of the ballad. You can't quite work out where the tune's going, but it is a very interesting version because Bubbling Johnny, actually having been invoked by the third sister, he appears and he asks the third sister where the robbers, because there seem to be more than one of them in this version, where are they hiding? And she replies, in the colder coves into the birk, that's a birch wood, where the robbers had their nest in Eldrio. And then Bubbling Johnny, the brother, goes and kills the robbers, and he finishes the ballad by saying, "I have killed my sisters and got revenge." What is that? Sorry, this isn't making sense to me, but I think it was a very garbled version. Up above the banks of Eldrio. Oh yes, I see. there's a backstory. I love ballad backstories, and I could go on for ages about them, but I'm not going to now. But when people actually ask the sisters, I'm all over the place today, the singers, people asked the singers what they thought the ballad was about or what it meant to them. Carpenter seems to have asked this woman, McEwen, what she thought the ballad was about, and he made a note to the effect that she must have told him that the seven robbers, there were seven robbers, they persuaded Bubbling Johnny, who was a local herd boy, and they thought he was a bit simple, and so they talked him into committing the robberies on their behalf, and it was he who attacked the sisters at the behest of the robbers. But when he found out that he'd killed the sisters, he thought, "Oh, those horrible robbers! They'd induced me to do this." So he goes back and kills them. That's why he says the line. He sings the line, "I have killed my sisters and got revenge." I hope that's all clear now. That was extremely badly explained, and my version was just as garbled as that of the original singer. So
Sure, it's fine.
this is what I like about this Carpenter's notes here. He wrote that the singer was trembling and her eyes were shining as she sang. She had a strong face like a lioness, as if under some strange spell. I mean, this what a great description of somebody singing a ballad. And he also said she was evidently loath to sing the concluding verse. Too heavy, she said, too awful, and she told him that she had heard the ballad preached against from the pulpit. Now that's very interesting because it's a dark ballad, it's a murder ballad, but you wonder why the religious establishment disliked it so much. And this is where it might be worth mentioning the word incest because in my wonderful book Motif Index of the Child Corpus, it lists about half a dozen child ballads like Sheath and Knife and Bonnie Hind and Lizzie Wan that contain an incest theme, but it doesn't include this one as an incest ballad. But it does seem to me that it's kind of lurking there. This guy has killed two of his sisters, but he's also been threatening to rape them, and there's just something rather queasy and unpleasant, even beyond the actual murders here. So I wonder if that's why preachers were inveighing about this in their hellfire sermons. So that was Mrs. McEwen. Carpenter got a couple more. Mary Stuart Robinson sang "The Banks of Edrico," which again you can hear the rather rough dictaphone recording. She is singing a refrain. I say Bonnie" as the second line, and "on the bonny banks of Edrico" at the end. And it's the kind of usual sequence in this case. He takes the first sister and kills the first two. But when the younger sister says, "I won't die by your penknife," what she does, she's given him 3 rounds and made him for to stand. So somehow it sounds as if she shot him. And then the singer made the comment at the end, "The Jode Kent Fine, it's her ain brother." I apologise for the Scottish accent to any Scots people listening, but that's the way it was written. A Jode is apparently, I looked it up, is a jade. So rather uncomplimentary description for the younger sister, but this woman knew damn well it was her own brother, so she's packed a gun from somewhere and shot him. And then there's one more version in Carpenter where it's the traditional little penknife that is used as the weapon. So I think that's probably about enough on the different plot variations of the ballad. They don't vary that much. I think the predominant way it ends is in the suicide of the robber, but there are these rather interesting variations where one, the younger sister shoots him, another one, the brother comes along and catches him and says he's going to be thrown into the poisoned lake. And then we have this really rather strange Bubbling Johnny version where the innocent herd boy has been put up to doing a load of murders and then goes and takes revenge on the brothers. So there you
Right.
have it.
Very good. And yeah, I was just while you were talking, I was listening. I promise, Your Honor, but I was also scanning through something just to see if I could find some information. And yeah, there was a version which we did mention briefly a while back in this chat. Um, one that the Roud Index it says is in England, but it's actually from a singer from Scotland, but recorded in Huddersfield. Minnie Hammon, and that's the Bonnie Banks of Fordie, and it's on a Scottish tradition anthology thing. But Hamish Henderson wrote some notes for it, and I was just scanning through that. And as you were talking about different variations of things, he noted that he said, as several scholars have pointed out, Child 14 affords a most effective example of the incremental repetition, which is one of the characteristic features of much ballad narrative, as we talked about that. It is also a ballad which displays the infinite adaptability of folk song, for in one of the American versions printed by Bronson, the rank robber has become the bank robber. I quite like that idea.
Yeah, well, great minds think alike is all I can say. Me and Hamish.
Yeah, and he said in some parts of Scotland, Airdrio has turned on the lips of children into Sweet Rio. Dorothy K. Haynes reports a version learned at a Scottish orphanage which had the line, "Will you be a robber's wife down by the bonny banks, Sweet Rio?"
Wow, that's really interesting.
I don't know if there's any way of tracking that one down. There's some collections from Dorothy K. Haynes, I'm not sure.
Okay, now I missed that one, but it also kind of ties in with what I'd said about one of these, the version from New York, which I said sounded as if it might be the children's song because it has this nonsense chorus. I've just got my Bronson out, and I'll sing you a bit of it to see if you can see what I mean. There were three maids lived in a barn. Hecky high says Bernie. Oh, it's a bit of it. It's a kind of sing song, almost like a playground kind of song. So there
Right,
you go.
yeah, of course.
So possibly, yeah, another life as a children's song. That doesn't surprise me. But thanks for that from me.
Sweet Rio instead of Edrio, but it's
Yeah,
definitely a simplification, isn't it? And
yeah.
yeah, fascinating stuff. Right, anything else before we go on to our recommended listening section?
Well, no, I think we can go straight to that, not least because I have that mini Haman or Heyman version right at the top of my list. So we could go to that if you
Okay,
like.
let's go for it.
Well, actually, before I talk about that one, there's one thing, and I got this off mainly Norfolk, that Dick Gaughan sang a version and he had apparently learned it from his mother. So we could give that as credit as a traditional version, but I'm not going to because I'm sure that Dick Gaughan's version might well want to be included in the revival version. So just
I'm
making
I'm
that point.
sure I'm sure it will be mentioned. Yes.
Yeah. So Minnie, who was the lady from Huddersfield, was brought up in Carnoustie, and I think this is Hamish Henderson, something he wrote as well. She and her sisters had a wide repertoire of Scottish material, and her mother and grandmother were singers. So I think the fact that it was collected in Huddersfield doesn't necessarily allow us to count it as an English version, but that recording is available on YouTube. I'm not quite clear. It's really quite short. It was recorded by Emily Lyle from the School of Scottish Studies. So whether only part of the recording went onto that album and that's what YouTube, what probably Reinhard the Fox, I would guess, has posted on YouTube. I'm not sure, but it's a pity there isn't more of it. It's an interesting version. I said that some of the Scots variants don't have this pattern of the repeating lines at line two and line four. So what Minnie Haman sings is she repeats the second line or the text of the second line, finishes with the Bonnie Banks of Fordio, but there's no refrain line as the second line. And I'm not going to sing you her version, but at some point I will sing you a little snatch of a Scots version that works like that. So anyway, you can find Minnie on YouTube. And
Okay.
then you can also find Stanley Robertson. I'm sure you'll be finding all the links for these, or I can send them to you. Stanley Robertson, the well-known singer from Aberdeenshire. It's a really great rendition, worth anybody listening to. Unlike a lot of the Scots versions, which have this minor inflection, it's a major tune, which actually recalls the well-known Scots version of the Seven Gypsies or the Gypsy Laddie, dum, da, 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 dum, dum, as the second line. He has a refrain, Ich in I say bonny o, on his last line refrain is on the bonny banks of the Airdrie. Oh, so that is definitely something worth hearing. And Stanley Robertson himself said about it, about the ballad, this does not have a happy ending, which I think is the kind of the understatement of the year. Then he talks about the chorus being basically a nonsense chorus like Hey Nonny No, which is pretty much what we thought. And he says it's a lang ballad. And he said it's fine if you've got the chorus and folk join in, but he makes the point that he doesn't really know anybody else who sings it except for somebody who learnt it from him, and that he had a last verse that nobody else knew, which I was interested in because his last verse is he's ta'en out his little penknife and he has ta'en his wretched life, which I have seen verses like that in other versions, but Stanley Robertson, the singers that he knew, were not singing that. So now this is one that I recorded this myself a few years ago, and I based mine on a version by a singer called John MacDonald. Again, it's on YouTube. Again, I think it's Renard the Fox has posted it, and there's a noise-reduced version, which is the one that I would probably recommend that people look up. Now, it's a bit of an odd recording because, as you sometimes find with recordings of traditional singers, he takes a verse or two to get into it. He doesn't quite have the tune at first, but then he gets into his stride, and it's quite a long version, similar in some respects to Mini Haman or Heyman, and it has the same pattern where there's not a repeated second line refrain, but the second line of the text repeats, and I probably haven't explained that very well, so I'm going to try and sing you a little bit of John MacDonald's version. You will be listening to him doing it, but it goes something like, for there were three sisters on a walk. They met a robber on the way. They met a robber on the way. Down by the bonny banks of Airdrie. Oh. So you see how that's working. Instead of having the refrain line to pad it out, they've just simply repeated they met a robber on the way. So that's how those work. It was collected by Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger from this guy called John MacDonald, who was a travelling hawker who sold bootlaces and shaving soap. And he moved around the bothies of Forfar and Angus in Scotland. And there's a really colourful account. I can't recommend enough the MacColl and Seeger book from which this comes, which is Travellers' Songs from England and Scotland, which has some really interesting pen pictures of some of the singers. But this guy, John MacDonald, reported that when a visitor arrived at the bothy where they were all gathered together, the visitor would be expected to either sing a song or play a tune. They had a set of bagpipes and a melodeon there as sort of house instruments. So they'd say, hey, sing us a song and give us a tune on one of those. And if the new arrival at the bothy wasn't able to do any of those, they'd hand him a pair of boxing gloves and he'd have to fight the hardest man in the bothy. So that was a really interesting little story as well.
Very good.
So talking as we were of Ewan MacColl, here's another traditional version which I do recommend. A woman called Betsy Miller uh, sings this ballad, and her son Jimmy is joining in the choruses. Jimmy, of course,
Ah,
is the original name of the man we know as Ewan MacColl. She sings the banks of Airdrie. She actually follows Child's E version in describing the sisters as the Duke of Perth's daughters, but she's certainly not singing that version out of the book because there are a number of differences from that text. The robber in this one is a banished man, as in some of the other child texts. So, no, she didn't learn it from the book. I'm quite happy to believe that went down through the family tradition. And it's one of these things because Ewan MacColl is so controversial, and he was certainly a great maker of his own myth. There is this tendency to think, well, I bet he made up that bit about his parents being Scottish ballad singers. But no, he didn't. And Betsy Miller is actually a great ballad singer, and that is one I would strongly recommend.
excellent.
Pausing for a small drink of water. Well, of course, the next place to go was obviously the Kister Riches site, which there's much good stuff on there. A woman called Jessie MacDonald, recorded by Peter Hall in 1968. This is another really nice tune. It's in a major tune, not one of the minor ones like the one I just sang a snatch of. It's got a big range, and when we get to the point about my brother's going to kill you, oh, what's his name? What's the brother's name? It's Bubbling Johnny again. So here comes Bubbling Johnny. Baby Lon is reappearing in this ballad from Jessie MacDonald, collected as recently as 1968. There's a really odd detail at the end of it. The Bubbling Johnny, who is this, we're led to believe from Carpenter, is this herd boy who got conned into doing the murders. He carries the dead bodies home with him and says, "Well, I'm never going to go robbing in the woods anymore." That was clearly it didn't work out so well. Which is quite a curious ending for the song that I can't make sense of. There's another one on Kiss to Riches, an anonymous singer in Kinross who sings almost the same thing with Bubbling John carrying the bodies home and saying, "I won't be a robber anymore." There's a woman called Martha Johnston, recorded by an American called Linda Williamson in 1978, which is a bit garbled and uncertain at first. And in that one, she doesn't sing the second line refrain, the I alone and alone Leo or whatever, but she doesn't repeat the second line either. So her verses are only 3 lines long because you don't have those repeated bits. So it sounds a bit odd, that one, but it's certainly interesting. And the brother in the wood, what's his name this time? It's not Bubbling Johnny, it's the bold robber John. So again, do we have some kind of textual Mondegreen stuff going on there? Anyway, it's an interesting version, if not perhaps the most musical. And there's also a fine recording of Norman Kennedy on the Kiss to Riches, recorded by Margaret Bennett. But again, Norman Kennedy was a wonderful singer, but he's kind of on that cusp between revival singer and traditional singer. He was up in Aberdeenshire and certainly knew Jeannie Robertson very well. His version sounds quite a lot like Stanley Robertson's, and he explains that he had a weaving school. I mean, Norman Kennedy in some circles is as well known for his weaving as for his singing, but he used to use this song as a very rhythmic song for when his weaving class were working on their materials. So that's probably more traditional recordings than I was really allowed, but I've mentioned them anyway because I do think there's some good stuff worth listening to. So yeah.
It's absolutely fine. I hadn't got any to recommend, so it was fine to have you talk about those. I'm pretty sure that the Jessie MacDonald one is going to be mentioned in our second half with Katie Macfarlane. I'm pretty sure there's a link there.
Right. Oh,
And
that's good.
yeah, the only thing I'll say to round this off is I was scanning through some of the sleeve notes to some revival versions, modern versions on Mainly Norfolk, and the most recent version that Mainly Norfolk provides is the one performed by Nick Hart and Tom Moore on their album The Color of Amber from 2023, called Babylon or Babylon. And Nick Hart's sleeve notes said, I normally do this sort of thing in the second half of these episodes, but this deliberately links to something we were talking about earlier. Nick wrote in his sleeve notes, "There are many versions of this ballad, my first exposure to it being Nick Jones. Our version uses a melody supplied by Emily Shackleton, who was the headmistress of Redland High School for Girls in Bristol from 1907 to 1920. She seems to have got it from either her mother or her nurse, and the text for Nick's version comes from Cynthia Lovell and is featured in Francis Groom's In Gypsy Tense." So Nick Hart is out there singing at least the text from that In Gypsy Tense version.
Oh, interesting. So good old Cynthia, she lives to fight another day. But I'm interested that they managed to get a tune from somebody in Bristol. I'm
Yeah,
curious now. Does that was somebody from Scotland? Because there doesn't seem to be much of an independent English tradition from this song. Anyway, what was it? What did you
no,
say? Called Shackleton or something? The lady, the head teacher.
Emily Shackleton,
Right,
Shekleton.
right.
headmistress of Redland High School for Girls in Bristol from 1907 to 1920.
Well, if we were really going down a rabbit hole, we'd look up the census and see where she was born, but I ain't going to do that.
And we have been talking for an hour and 10 minutes, so let's not do that.
Oh, no. I thought this was going to be a short one. I thought there wasn't much to say, but then I found the Gypsy Tents book and I found the one about the woman singing like a lioness. So it was so interesting.
Well, it's shorter than the last time you were on the podcast anyway, so that's a step in the right direction. Anyway, it's all really fascinating stuff, and looking forward to discussing this further with Katie later on. As usual, thanks ever so much for your time and effort into this. I know you've been away, so you were up since 7 this morning, finishing off your presentation for this. So
yeah, I take this stuff seriously. I like to do my homework.
You enjoy homework? No, I certainly enjoy this kind of work sometimes as well, so that's good. Anyway, very much appreciated on this stuff as usual, and we will see you again in 2 weeks' time for another one. More on that later on. So, I guess in the meantime, Brian Peters, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Matt. It was good fun.
A huge thanks to Brian Peters for providing us with the history of the Bonnie Banks of Fordie. We're now at the halfway point in the episode, so we'll just take a few minutes and listen to a few different versions of the song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is the Bonnie Banks of Fordie from Minnie Hammond, and then the Bonnie Banks of Airdrie from Jessie MacDonald, John MacDonald, Betsy Miller and Ewan McCall, and Stanley Robertson.
He took the first one by the hand, turned her round and made her stand, turned her round and made her stand on the bonny, bonny banks of Fordie, oh. Oh, will you be a robber's wife, or will you die by my penknife? Will you die by my penknife on the bonny, bonny banks of Fordie, oh. Oh, I'll not be a robber's wife, nor will I die by your penknife, nor will I die by your penknife on the bonny, bonny banks of Fordie, oh.
Pretty sisters went out for a walk. It nice about me, oh. They met a robber by the way on the bully bank to Airdrie, for he caught the oldest by the hand. He nice about me, oh. He turned around and he made her stand in the bully bank to Airdrie.
For the 1-3 sisters went a walk down by the bonny banks of Airdrie, oh. They met a robber on the way. They met a robber on the way. They met a robber on the way. Down by the bonny banks of Airdrie, oh. They took the first one by the hand. He twirled her round till he made her stand. He twirled her round till he made her stand. Down by the bonny banks of Airdrie, oh.
The Duke of Perth had 3 daughters, Eke, nice, bonny, oh, and they all went to tip the floors on the bonny banks of Airdrie, oh. They hadn't put a floor but in Ike nice bonny o. When up and came a banished man on the bonny banks o' Erdrio.
Three sisters went out a walk yon day. Ich nice a bonny o, and they met a robber on their way on the bonny banks o' the Erdrio. He's in the first yen by the hand. Ich nice a bonny o, and he's barreled her around and he's made her stand on the bonny banks o' the Erdrio. It's will ye be a rank robber's wife? Ich nice a bonny o, or will ye die by my penknife on the bonny banks o' the Erdrio?
And you can find the links to those tracks in the show notes. On to the second half of this episode. I sat down for a chat about this song with this week's singer guest, Katie Macfarlane. Well, hello and welcome to In the Roud, Katie Macfarlane. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hi. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. Well, it's very nice to have you on here, and it's very nice to meet you. It's a first time meeting.
Yes, well, it's lovely to meet you as well, and thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. So, yes, it's normally when I've managed to get people on who I've not met before, there's usually lots of mutual friends, and there aren't actually that many, not that we could think of offhand before this started.
Probably add a lot more than we have realised.
Yes, in fact, I'm just looking to see 28 mutual friends on Facebook.
Oh well, we must know a lot of the same people.
So, Ross Cooper,
Yeah.
Laurie Watson, Iona Lane, Iona Fife, Simon Toomere, Jen Butterworth, there's a few, and Sarah Jane Shankland.
Yeah, do you know her? Yeah.
Yeah, she was in my year on the Newcastle folk degree.
Oh, okay. Oh, she's lovely.
Yeah, I haven't seen Sarah Jane since we left the folk degree.
Oh, okay.
We graduated in 2012. So, in 13 years until I saw Sarah Jane.
Oh.
So yeah, a few mutual friends. That's very good. So let's get going with Roud 27, Bonnie Banks of Fordie. Before we get into the song, though, tell us a bit, as much as you're willing to divulge, about yourself and your sort of history with folk music and your sort of musical upbringing, if there was one. And did you just discover folk music, or was for a lot of people folk music is in the family? So what's the story with Katie Macfarlane?
So I pretty much grew up with folk music my whole life, and especially Scottish traditional music, because my late grandfather was from the Isle of North Uist, and kind of he was a native Gaelic speaker and was always around sort of traditional music, and yeah, so I always had, it was always sort of in the family. My mum and dad love listening to folk music, and I can't even pinpoint a time where I was like, oh, I want to do that, apart from probably going to what you call a phage. You probably know about them. In Scotland, they sort of have it's like maybe a week of kind of music, and it's a sort of Gaelic organisation that run these all over the country, and I attended one when I was 7, and I was in Uist on holiday because I went up every summer, and I started off learning Gaelic song, but I kind of spoke a wee bit of Gaelic, like the tiniest amount, from going to like a play group when I was younger. But my mum isn't not a native Gaelic speaker, but she understands a lot of the language. But my papa didn't properly pass it down. So I kind of didn't grow up knowing much Gaelic, but I fell in love with singing in Gaelic, and also I'm related to Julie Fowlis, the Gaelic singer, and kind of she was a big inspiration for me, and kind of the first person that I saw do that sort of thing for a living. And yeah, I absolutely fell in love with it as soon as I went to the Fèis when I was younger. And yeah, I think that was definitely the first time I decided that it was something I wanted to do. So I joined a Gaelic choir, and kind of that's where I started my pronunciation of the language. I kind of developed that, and yeah, I attended mods kind of all over the country as well, local and national. And the competing side of things now, I've realised that it's not for me, and I never actually really enjoyed doing it.
Right, sure.
Yeah. So, but it was kind of just something as a young Gaelic singer you feel you have to do. I totally love that people do it and respect people who enjoy it. But for me, the competing side of things was never made me feel good. But yeah, so I think it was good for me to learn the songs and a good way to expose me to Gaelic. But yeah, I also growing up kind of felt guilty that I didn't speak Gaelic, and that I was singing in it. I'd always have to read sort of English translations of the songs, and decided that I definitely was going to learn Gaelic. So I went to uni and did a degree in Gaelic. So that kind of, at that point when I started that, I was kind of worrying about, am I going to be able to do music because I'm doing a language degree and I'm not doing a music degree? And just felt a bit conflicted, like I wasn't going to be able to actually pursue a career in it. And then I realised kind of it was the best thing for me to do, because at the end of the day, when you're singing songs, you want to be able to instantly know what you're singing rather than have to spend time looking at translations and every word in a translation. So that really actually was the best thing for me to do, I think. And that also exposed me to different events that I could sing at, and I met other singers as well in that course at Glasgow Uni. And yeah, so that was kind of, Gaelic song was really my first exposure to singing myself as a folk singer. And then that just kind of branched out. I went to Tintoed Summer School, led by Simon Toomey, Hands Up for Trad, and that was in Biggar. And I went there one year and I met Siobhan Miller, the Scots singer, and she taught me a lot of Scots song. And then I kind of thought, oh, I love that as well. So I kind of then started learning more Scots songs, and started writing songs as well. I don't write in Gaelic because I'm a bit too nervous to do that, but so the most of the songs that I write are in English. And I've also learned quite a few Catalan songs as well. So when I lived in Barcelona for a while, and there I met loads of Catalan folk singers and joined a wee folk choir, and it was lovely. So I've just got a whole different range of kind of singing styles, and I've just grown up with folk music basically.
Fantastic. And do you play instruments at all, or are you just primarily a singer?
So I secretly play the whistle. But it's not really a secret because I've said it. But
well, it is an instrument you can hide.
Yeah, so I used to play it a lot when I was younger. But the thing that I struggled with was, once I knew how to read music, I struggled then learning tunes by ear and things. So that's my downfall. So I was never confident to go to sessions and play and everything. And I also, when I was younger, I played the flute and things, but I would love to play it now, but I just never felt I was good enough to like keep it up, and which is a shame. I probably should have just kept it up anyway, but yeah.
Never too late. Never too late to do anything. Get back at it. It's great.
But basically, like, that's what because my late papa, who I mentioned, who is actually I don't know, it's the anniversary of his death on Saturday. I don't know why I brought that up, but it just happens to be while I'm talking about him, so I was thinking about that. But yeah, he kind of played loads of instruments. So he played like fiddle, accordion, guitar, but just kind of went between them all, and like would never just kind of focus on one. So I feel like I'm kind of like that as well, because I played the fiddle as well when I was younger, and but I could never just kind of sit and properly learn one.
That's fair. I'm the same, except I kept going with all the instruments I play.
You're probably a lot more talented than I am, so
we're all talented in different ways. But yes, people can't see this because they listen to it, but on Zoom you can see. But there is currently about 8 or 9 melodians there, and there's mandolins and a bass guitar, and I've moved away from the Zoom anyway, microphone. But yeah, lots of instruments strewn around, reminding me that I own them and that I can't play them very well. There's some I can play very well, but other ones I can't play very well. Yes. Well, at least you do play the whistle secretly, even if it's secretly,
Yeah.
It's quite hard to play the piano accordion in secret.
I know.
At least the whistle is quite good.
I actually, like, whenever I play it, I can't look at anyone, so I have to turn away.
You sort of hide it up your sleeve in a session if you suddenly want to pretend you didn't bring anything with you.
I'd have to have
it's like, oh nope, sorry, didn't bring it with me. Oh, it's just up my sleeve.
I definitely need quite a few drinks before playing at a session, but yeah.
Fair enough. Brilliant. And because when it comes to this song, I know it's on an album you made. Off the top of my head, I couldn't remember which one, but or whether you've made more than one.
No, I've only made one.
Remember.
Anian Hainte.
The Enchanted Girl.
Enchanted
That's
Girl,
right.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted, because that is, I know there are lots of musicians on that. Is that like an actual band that you have, or is that just like you're just bringing loads of people together to make a nice noise?
So, they're not my sort of. I'd say probably the pianist and the guitarist are normally who I'd have in my band. So if I'm playing live as like a trio, I've also had the bassist do a couple of gigs with me, but they're not sort of my official. I don't have like an official band sort of thing.
Right.
Sure. So, but yeah, it's just all musicians that I loved. I was so lucky to get funding from Creative Scotland. So it meant that I could make the album and have like all the musicians that I wanted on it. So it was my absolute dream album with all the dream people.
Very good. That's a good list of people.
Yeah.
I think I've met Michael Biggins in passing. I don't think he might not remember me, but we were. I think if it's the person I'm thinking of, we met very, very briefly a couple of years ago.
He's a great guy.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, very, very good pianist. I was very impressed. Right then, so the song we're here for today, Roud 27, Child Ballad 14, Bonnie Banks of Fordie, amongst other titles, as we heard from Brian Peters earlier. So what's your relationship with this song? Does it? I know because you sang a version on that album. I think I noticed that might be the only non-Gaelic song on the album. Is that right?
So there's a couple of Catalan songs, and there's one that I wrote in English, but yeah, the rest are in Gaelic. So
it's the only traditional song in the English language.
Yes, basically, yeah.
That's good. Excellent. There we go. Excellent. So yeah, so what's your sort of history with this song? If it is, because I know there's the version that we just mentioned that you did on the album. Were you aware of this song anyway before bringing it to life for the album, or was this something that, because some people, managed to only just find a song and then put it straight on an album, and some people have heard a song for years beforehand. Was this song sort of already in your sort of consciousness, your awareness, or was this something that you found specifically for the album?
So it'd been in my repertoire for a good few years before I recorded it. But I found it in a book called The Scottish Folk Singer. Basically, I was just looking through the book one day and singing some songs, and I was very excited to find it because I am from Airdrie, and that's the version that's in the book is Bonnie Banks. Well, the title on the contents and in the book is Bonnie Banks of Airdrie, but it also mentions Babylon and things. But yeah, so first of all, I was kind of like just shocked that there was a song that described the banks of Airdrie as Bonnie, and yeah, and just that there was. I never have I found a song related to Airdrie. Obviously, I don't know if it happened, if it took place here, or it's actually like comes from somewhere else. But I like that it's got that link. So I found that and kind of learned it, and but I was aware that there were other versions with other titles, but I just quite liked the version that was in this book and learned those words, and that's what's on the album. But yeah, because I'd sung it for quite a few years before recording the album, I really, really loved it. And but the arrangement on the album is a bit different to what I'd done previously, kind of live for gigs and things.
Well, that's great that you actually live in Airdrie. Do you live in Airdrie still?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or
Yes.
you do? That's amazing. I'm looking it up now. Actually, I'm using Wikipedia, which is probably not the greatest source, but nevertheless, you get some basic information. 400 feet above sea level.
Yeah, so
anyone really wants to know that?
Actually, it's called in Gaelic and Harsh 3, which is like the high slope, because it's all very high up. It's right. So, but it's I mean, growing up here, I think just because I don't know, I was never very fond of it, and then I always said I wanted to move to Uist, and when I started going out with my now husband, I said, like, please make me move out of Airdrie when we grow up. And but then when I was living in Barcelona and I got really homesick, he said to me, do you want me to buy a house in Airdrie? Kind of half joking, because he was looking at houses in Glasgow and the prices were obviously a lot more expensive. Right. And I was feeling so homesick that I was like, yes, please buy a house in Airdrie. And he did. So now I'm living in Airdrie still.
There you go. Back where it all began.
But
I've just skimmed some information. This is fascinating. It's and the first. Okay, now this is genuinely interesting. Airdrie, in 1853, established the first ever public library in Scotland.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
That's good information.
That's very cool.
According to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do some what's the word? Double or triple checking. But nevertheless, if that's true, that's really good information.
Yeah.
First
cool.
public library in Scotland. So there you go.
But the thing is, I grew up in Airdrie, and I've lived here my whole life. But then where we've moved to, we're in a wee village that I didn't know as well. It's kind of it's on the outskirts of Airdrie. And we actually we're so close to a canal and everything, and it's there's really nice scenery, which I didn't know existed at all in Airdrie until I moved here as an adult. And now I'm kind of that could be the Bonnie Banks of Airdrie, because when I first heard that I was like, the Bonnie Bank, what? But that might be it.
I was literally about to ask you if there was a pool of water in Airdrie somewhere, just because otherwise the song doesn't make sense.
I know, exactly. So
But maybe
that's
it's that, you know. Yeah.
yeah.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. So I guess what I don't whether you remember or not. Do you have a memory of sort of what kind of attracted you to this song? What made you want to sing it? You know.
I think well mostly the Airdrie connection, but also I liked the melody, the tune, and just kind of I mean it's a really the story is like when I have to talk about it at gigs and things, I feel quite awkward because it's like a really dark, twisted story. But I know that most folk songs are anyway, so but you still kind of feel like I don't know, it's just bizarre because the actual melody that I sing and the one that I learned and found in this book is quite upbeat and quite, you know, it's really not what you'd link to the words or the story. So I always feel, I don't know why I always feel a bit awkward talking about it, but it's just yeah, I really like it. It's an interesting story nonetheless, and yeah, just I felt like I couldn't not sing it basically because first of all it's connected to Airdrie.
Yeah.
I don't know many folk singers from Airdrie, and I think also just kind of like you also just kind of think, and I know you spoke about it a bit before, but like how did it even come about? Like, how did that happen that they did not know that that was their brother? And also, he didn't know they were, like, he was obviously so fond of them. I mean, in this version anyway, when he's so upset at the end. So, to me, it's just like, I find that part quite not funny. I don't know what the word is, but I just find it like, I just don't get how that happened. And I quite like that we don't know why and we don't know we won't know the answer to that. So yeah, I think it's just kind of like a folk song that I enjoy. Like quite often also kind of tunes of folk songs are quite samey and um this one to me felt a bit different to what I'd sung before, and that something different could be done with it as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think, yeah, sometimes there's characters that we just don't understand the reasoning for their actions or why they suddenly had a bout of amnesia and to not
yeah,
realize who his sisters were, you know, and stuff. There are other songs like that where what's the song? I've been lots of different titles for it, but Molly Vaughan, Polly Vaughan, Molly Vaughan, all those songs in which the man shoots his true love because he thought she was a swan. And that's his line of
yeah,
defense. And I don't think that'll stand up in court, quite honestly.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
so all that
I
sort
know,
of thing. You know, it's weird, but that's some of this stuff can be classed as weird, just objectively weird in terms of plots and storyline and stuff. But I think that's part of it. That's part of the beauty and the kind of strange, sort of almost magical sort of majesty of a lot of these old stories. Is they can be a
yeah,
bit weird, and not
yeah,
everything is completely sort of neatly tied up in a bow
yeah,
and explained. You know.
yeah, yeah. No, it does. I think yeah, that was part of the draw. But it's yeah, it's just a good song. It's just a great and it's a good story to tell, even though I mean some songs maybe don't have much substance to them. But I feel like this one definitely has a lot of substance, and yeah, so it's something that you can kind of also talk to an audience about, and yeah, tell them a good old story.
That's right. And this one is quite interesting because just not apart from the plot and everything, but just some of the language and the turns of phrase and things. I mean, I find the phrase "rank robber's wife" quite hard to say. I don't know how you managed to get away by saying it one, two, three, four, five, six times in
Yes.
each performance. It's a little bit of a get your mouth around that sort of line, you know. It's
I
quite
know
good.
it is, yeah. And it's also just, I think the way the kind of story goes, like, it's quite easy to add dynamics. And because you sort of get at the end, like the sister that stands up and says, I'm not gonna marry you, and I'm also not gonna die. And so there it goes from like kind of like there's a lot of sadness in it, but you also feel like there's a lot of empowerment at one point. But and then yeah, it just the tone does kind of change throughout as well. So it's quite good when you've got that as a singer, so it's not just constantly on the one level, and you can just add kind of, and also the musicians can add to that as well and change what they're playing to fit it. So
Absolutely. And I was going to mention something else. Yes, I've not really come across any of the folk song as far as I can remember. Someone might point out to me another example of this. But I can't think of another traditional song that includes a penknife.
right, yeah.
It's just suddenly in this one, not necessarily the fact that it's a knife, but it's specifically a penknife.
Penknife.
I know Brian was saying that penknife is which never really occurred to me, the idea that penknife actually was literally for sharpening quills.
Okay, yeah.
Sharpening your pen. The whole point of the name. It's in the name, which I never considered before. But nevertheless, lots of characters have knives and there's daggers and things in songs, but specifically a penknife, that seems an oddly specific type of...
And it's also not the most, I mean, I know it's not great, but it's not the most threatening, sort of like, you feel like you're trying to sound all sort of threatening and scary, but then it's like your penknife. Okay,
it's probably a bit. It's probably not the biggest knife you could get your hands on. Probably is it? It's probably
I know
quite
what.
small.
To be fair, I've never heard another song include a penknife. So
no,
yeah.
so that's very interesting. I think. But to keep a lookout for that, I sing a song with my harmony trio that includes. I always mention this when I sing the song, but it includes. What are they called? Opera glasses.
Okay.
It's just
opera glasses. Oh right. Okay.
Yeah.
Like as in going to the opera.
Yeah.
With
But yeah, it's a song called "Down by the Seaside," which I've not found anywhere except one traditional singer from Sussex called George Maynard. And I'm from Sussex, so I do a lot of Sussex sort of material, and I'm looking it up now just to find the Roud number, just so that I know if I'll ever get to cover it. Down by the Seaside, Roud 1712. It'll turn up on the Patreon at some point, I'm sure. Not on the main podcast. But Down by the Seaside, it's one of those sort of, it's almost a bit like a Broken Token song in a way, that the lovers have split up because he's gone off to sea or whatever, and a bit like the song Claudie Banks. I mean, she's waiting for him, and then he spies her he's walking the cliffs. He spies her. He says, "What are you doing here?" She says, "I'm waiting for my true love to come back." And in most songs like that, he then pretends that he's died, in that he says, "Maybe your true love has died," blah blah, and she proves her loyalty by saying, "I will never marry again if he has died." And then he whips off his false moustache or something and says, "Surprise, it's actually me. Aren't you so glad I'm actually alive now? We can get married again." It's that sort of song, except that this one, Down by the Seaside, actually stops at the end of verse 4. So we just get she hears all the conversation at the beginning, and then we get she hears that her true love is shot. She's heard that he's died, and then she says, "It was the last line. If he died for honor, then I'll die for love." And it sort of ends there. But there's a line in it in which we get beginning of the third verse. "As she was lamenting and could not prevail, she looked through her opera glass and saw the ship sail." And that's the only mention of opera glass I've found in any folk song.
Yeah, just casually.
Yeah, so we've got opera glass in that one. We've got a pen knife in here. So yeah, it's yeah. So I wonder whether, I mean, I should have asked this to Brian really on the history side. When did penknife come in? Was penknife in those the earliest versions, or was it a bit of literal what's the word? A bit of literate creativity, I suppose. A bit of creative writing on the part of a traditional singer at some point. or was it something else? I don't know. Who? The answer will be who knows, I suppose. But it's fascinating that it's there anyway. I think
Yeah.
we could ponder that one for a while without reaching any sort of conclusions. And your version features just one mention of Boblin John.
Yes. And that was I didn't know about the I didn't know because I knew it went by the title of Babylon, but I didn't know that was why. And I always wondered.
And it was only when Brian mentioned the character of Bubbling John that, and then he said, is that the connection to Babylon? Because there's that connection as well as the whole, I think he said one version where there's a character called Baby Lon.
Yeah.
As in someone called Lon who looks a bit babyish, sort of baby face Lon sort of thing. And so, what's the connection? When was the connection that linked Babylon, Babylon, and Bubbling
John? Yeah.
It's those kind of weird links that, maybe we'll never know exactly what the order of sequencing was, but it's really fascinating stuff that I'm sort of constantly fascinated by that.
And also, he doesn't sound like the most threatening of people with that name either. Like Baby Lon, Boblin John. You wouldn't.
It's almost like a sort of pirate names. You get the people pirate names like Cutthroat James or something. All these names, then he just gets that one, Bubbling John. Yeah. It's not particularly threatening. And he says they call my brother Bubbling John. I wonder who they are in this context. Just
I know.
General people in general, or his followers. Don't know. We've just spent about 10 minutes speculating. I mean, it's good to speculate on things, but without coming to any definite conclusions. But at the same time, no conclusions been made. Anyway, I mean, so you said this one's quite a sort of upbeat and quite happy sort of melody. It's in the major key and everything, and I have actually heard performances of this song with the same melody as yours, but sung much slower.
Okay.
Which which even a major key sung slowly can give you a bit of a downbeat sort of atmosphere sometimes, because it's not. Yeah. I get annoyed when some people always sort of moan that major key stuff means it's happy, and I think, well, not necessarily. Depends on how you sing it.
Exactly, you're correct. Yeah.
And so, I've heard slower ones. They don't necessarily sound menacing, but there's certainly it gives it a different atmosphere and a different sort of vibe. Singing it slowly, and so I was mildly taken aback by quite how jolly your your album arrangement was. I mean, it's fantastic. I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't expecting anything quite so upbeat and jolly. But no, very good.
That's the thing. I mean, I'd say it's one of the most upbeat songs on my album, and then you look at the words, and you're like, but honestly, it's the same with Gaelic song. There's so many kind of, I don't know if you've heard of walking. You will have heard of walking songs.
Oh yeah,
where so a lot of them, they always have to be sung kind of to a certain pace, but the subject matter is so dark sometimes, and so just does not fit with how the song is sung.
Yeah.
And so I find that happens quite a lot to me, where I will just automatically record a song with what should sound like a happier arrangement, but then it's actually quite a dark song. But I'm in a way, it just makes it all a bit easier to digest. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, definitely. I think I'm just used to that sort of. Most Gaelic songs are pretty dark and pretty sad, but they can have such an upbeat melody and be interpreted and sort of if you don't know what someone's singing, you wouldn't know what the story is behind the song with how maybe kind of, I don't know, whatever pace of the song is, or how upbeat it is. So Yeah, no, there's definitely a bit of kind of contrast there between the words and the actual arrangement.
Yeah, no, it's great.
But
You turned it into a pop song. It's great.
yeah.
I love it. Turn folk songs into pop songs. I'm all for that sort of thing. Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's also funny because I used to sing it, probably like I said before, I used to sing it a bit slower. And then it was my husband Pablo, who's a guitarist, he was like, he just started playing what's now sort of the arrangement. Because he was like, oh, I think it was him actually. Now I'm thinking, why was it so upbeat? But he went, it's his fault. He was like, no, it needs to be faster. It needs to be more upbeat.
It needs to be really funky and have sort of syncopations and stuff. And
Yeah, so he's mostly the reason. But I did think when I heard it, no, that I really, really like that. And it made it, so I don't know, it came to life a wee bit when he played it a bit faster. And and the piano as well just adds a bit of extra lightness to what's quite a dark story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for, you know, singing songs in their sort of most basic, pure form, the unaccompanied version. Yeah. But I'm also all for a bit of, what's the phrase of?
A bit of cheese.
A bit of sort of. I'm looking for a specific thing. I'm all for a bit of mucking around as well with the song. You know, just having a bit of a laugh with it. You know, and approaching the song from a different angle in terms of the musical arrangement. You know, can be fun if you get the right spirit. That can be really good fun.
Yes.
It can annoy some people, but it can be quite good fun in the process. But yeah, amazing. Well, unless there's anything else sort of on whatever subject you want to talk about, then we can move on to the recommended listening section.
Okay, that'll be mostly you.
That's fine. But so yeah, you had one though, didn't you? I think you mentioned one earlier.
Old Blind Dogs. I knew had done Bonnie Max of Fordie.
Fordie, okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I've got quite a few to recommend that I know of. We'll start keeping it in-house, as always. Brian Peters, of this episode, did record the Bonnie Banks of Airdrie on his 2010 album called Gritstone Serenade. And that's the one that's in a book called Travellers' Songs from England and Scotland. That's a book by Ewan McCall and Peggy Seeger. And then, we know that, Nick Jones did it. I'm trying to find the mention. Nick Jones, there we go. Yeah, Nick Jones, the Bonnie Banks of Fordie. He sort of, I don't know whether he changed it or not, but I think it's the sleeve notes for that one say that, because that ended up on some Fellside record label anthology CDs. And the sleeve note to that said that Nick collected his versions from verses found in Child, and the tune was inspired by somewhere else. So I don't know sort of where it got bits from, but in that one, the robber is not related to the three sisters. Okay. And the third sister is rescued by her brother, and the robber gets hanged. So there we go.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but Nick Jones, you can find that one. I got a copy of it because it's on the CD Ballads, which is a Fellside CD of about 13 different people singing ballads. Oh, and Brian Peters is there singing Young Hunting. There we go, very good. John Bowden, who was on this podcast in season 1, episode 1, did record it for his A Folk Song a Day project in May of 2011. If anyone wants to go back to that, he learned from someone, but his version is mostly appears to be the Dick Gocken version, which is the Bonnie Banks of Fordie again. Good friend of mine and a lot of people, Pete Coe. I'm not entirely sure where he got this from because it's called the Banks of Virgie, Virgie.
Oh.
And I'm not entirely sure what sort of strain of the ballad that is, what line of ascent, as it were, that one is. But well, there we go. Mainly Norfolk. Hello, Reinhardt. He listens to the podcast. Hello, Reinhardt. Good to see you. Mainly Norfolk. He always includes the sleeve notes as well, which is quite handy when looking up the stuff. And Pico's version. Oh, okay. Based on variants collected by Maud Carpellies in Newfoundland. So that's that side of the pond version. Oh, Virgie, it's probably it's also a close relation of sort of Virginia and that sort of thing, isn't it? It's probably going to be linked to that somehow, isn't it? There we go. We're figuring stuff out as we go. Also, a guest who was on the podcast this season, episode 1 of this season, singer and squeezebox extraordinaire Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne. We had him on the podcast for the Outlandish Night episode, and he recorded this as Babylon on his first CD, Outway Songster, called Babylon, but his version is the Bonnie Banks of Air Dio, I think, rather than Air Drio. I don't know how that evolved into Air Dio.
Yeah.
I think it's Air Dio anyway, but
hopefully not just a spelling mistake.
well, I mean, it could be. I don't know. Yeah, sure. There's all that's the beauty of the evolving tradition, is that it's just what happens, Oh, and it's the same version that Brian Peters did. It's in that Ewan McCollum Peggy Seeger book. And I mentioned earlier in the history half, Nick Hart and Tom Moore recorded the song Babylon or Babylon. And Nick Hart said that he first heard the Nick Jones one, but the version that him and Tom Moore did on that album, Colour of Amber, is that one from the book by Francis Groom called In Gypsy Tents from 1880, with the gypsy singer Cynthia Lovell. As I said, that book is the only entry for Cynthia Lovell in the entire Roud Index. It's the only song ever collected from Cynthia Lovell.
Oh.
But Nick Hart's brought it to life. And a personal favourite of mine is the Scottish trio Shepherd, Spears and Watson. Pete Shepherd, Tom Spears, Arthur Watson. Pete Shepherd is a singer and melodeon player. He's from Gloucestershire and he's done a lot of extensive field recordings and research on Gypsy Traveller singers, but he lives in Scotland and he runs the Fife traditional singing weekends and things. So he's very involved with that. Tom Spears, Tam Spears, fiddle player and singer, and Arthur Watson, singer and whistle player. And they made 2 albums, both of which are heavily influential in me properly pursuing folk music as a career. And on their second album, Over the High Hills, they put the Banks of Airdrio on there. And that's the one I'm familiar with that is the same as your melody, but a lot slower.
Okay,
So yeah, that's a good list actually. Sometimes these songs, haven't been picked up much, and we're not sure how many times they've been sung, and sometimes there's far too many to recommend in one episode. And this one, there's a good handful at least, a good handful or handful and a half. We got the Old Blind Dogs, Nick Jones, John Bowden, Pete Coe, Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne, Nick Hart and Tom Moore, Shepherd, Spears and Watson. Before we wrap things up, what have you got, if anything, sort of coming up over the next weeks or months? What's in store for Katie Macfarlane?
Well, hopefully a lot of sleep because I've not long after having a baby. So,
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, well, I can't imagine there will be lots of sleep, but yes, I've got 2 wee ones, and I'm on kind of maternity leave at the moment, so not got too much coming up. I am going to be performing at a festival. I don't even know if I should say this.
That's fine. You will be at a festival somewhere in the summer.
Yeah, because I don't know. Because it's not if I should say it.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. I'm not going to force you to reveal anything.
I don't know. Apart from that, I've really not got much coming up.
Well, you got your hands full.
I'm a weather presenter, so I've been concentrating on that a lot recently.
Right. Okay. There we go.
Yes.
But yes, obviously you do have your hands full with little
yeah.
people. The Best of luck to you on that front. I'm sure you'll be grand. I'm sure you'll be good.
Thank you.
But yeah, so but then your album is out there though, isn't it? To buy.
Yes.
Have you got an online shop somewhere, or is that sold through the record label, or what's the deal with tracking that down?
You can buy my album through my website, just katemacfarlane.com, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is, to be honest. But yes, it is. And there's a shop on there, or you can get it on Bandcamp, or you can stream it.
Very good.
Yeah, all the usual places.
Excellent, good stuff. Well, we'll leave things there. Yeah, thanks so much for being a part of this. It's been very much appreciated. And
Yes.
I'm sure. Hopefully, we'll see you again at some point on the pod for another song or two. We'll see how many songs we get through, and we might have you back at some point.
Yeah,
That'll be good fun. Anyway, but in the meantime, though, Katie Macfarlane, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
3 pretty fair maids went out for a walk. Can I say bonny oh? They met a robber on the way, on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. He's ta'en the first one by the hand. Can I say bonny oh? He's twirled her down and he made her stand on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. Would ye be a rank robber's wife? Can I say bonny oh? Or would you die by my penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie? I'll no be a rank robber's wife. Can I say bonny oh? I'd rather die by your penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. He's ta'en the second one by the hand. Can I say bonny oh? He's twirled her down and he made her stand on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. Would ye be a rank robber's wife? Can I say bonny oh? Or would you die by my penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie? I'll no be a rank robber's wife. Can I say bonny oh? I'd rather die by your penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. He's ta'en the third one by the hand. Can I say bonny oh? He's twirled her down and he made her stand on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. Would ye be a rank robber's wife? Can I say bonny oh? Or would you die by my penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie? I'll no be a rank robber's wife. Can I say bonny oh? Not I'll not die by your penknife on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. But I have a brother in this wood. Can I say bonny oh? If you kill me, then he'll kill you on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. Come tell me your brother's name. Can I say bonny oh? They call my brother Boblin John on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. Oh dear me, what is this I have done? Can I say bonny oh? I've killed my sisters all but one on the bonny banks o' Airdrie. He's lifted them up and he's ta'en them hame. say bonny, oh. A robin, I'll ne'er go again on the bonny banks o' Airdrie, oh.
That was Katie Macfarlane singing The Bonny Banks of Airdrie. That brings us to the end of this episode. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the song. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on the various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, X, just about, Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you are enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Podcasts, that's a star rating out of 5, and there's a little place to write review as well. It doesn't take long. Very much appreciate it. 5-star reviews, please. And on YouTube and places like that, you can click the like button on the particular episode or video. Also hit the subscribe button as well, that'd be very nice, and you can write comments underneath the video as well. All of that sort of thing really goes to help the podcast to reach a wide audience. The more sort of clicks and likes it gets and things, all part of the big algorithm machine. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially, then please do head on over to patreon.com/intheroud, and there you can sign up for either £5 or £10 per month and receive weekly bonus content in return. Even if you don't want to hear the bonus content, that's the place to support the podcast if you want to do that. On the Patreon, we're in the middle of a current Singer's Choice mini-season at the moment with special guest Rachel McShane. Last time we looked at her second choice, which was Roud 3448. That's the song Plumen Laddie. This week we'll be looking at Rachel's third and final choice, Roud 339, which turns out to be Child Ballad 219, a song called The Gardener. And the history side of that episode will be provided by a regular podcast contributor, Vic Gammon. So sign up to hear that and more at patreon.com/intheroud. In the Roud is a media partner of Veteran, the traditional music label. Although this week's song does not currently feature on any of their releases, you can find details of their extensive catalogue on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Brian Peters and Katie Macfarlane. Join me next week for episode 8. We will be looking at Roud 28, which is Child Ballad number 17, Hind Horn. On the history side, I'll be joined by a brand new contributor, David Atkinson, and my singer guest will be Rachel Newton. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.